Um, one thing to be noted here is that on the campuses that have had the most success in mobilizing people, there have been not only fighting student organizations, but also unions, teachers unions, graduate student unions, as well as faculty and staff who wanted to fight back, and they formed coalitions. And that's where places like California and Milwaukee, they built coalitions with lots of student groups and working organizations, professors, everybody else to challenge this. And as a result, they've seen the most militant fightbacks. So that brings us to where does this movement need to go? So the immediate demands that are the most pressing for the education rights movement, first is chop from the top. Students are seeing fewer and fewer classes. Top administrators are earning CEO salaries. Across the country, the number of administrators and their pay is growing. But at the same time, there's a claim that there's no money to pay the teachers and the staff, right? So schools are laying off their workers and outsourcing jobs to lower paid non-union workers, to temps and stuff like that. And what this is, it's a corporate approach to education. Run education like a business. That's the idea. It's education for profit. And this approach is just making this situation worse. So the education rights movement has to demand that layoffs and outsourcing is not acceptable as a solution. It's not the solution. You're balancing the budget on the backs of working people. What you need to do is cut the pay of these highest paid administrators. So the next point is to tax the rich. State government and local schools across the country have less tax revenues due to the recession. That's the way it is. Many governments are raising their sales taxes, which falls the hardest on low-income families. So both Republican and Democratic politicians say they can't raise taxes on the rich. Nonetheless, the people of Oregon recently showed them how by raising the taxes on corporations and high-income households, and that can happen. Tax the rich means there's a small percentage of people in this country that own immense amounts of wealth, and they should pay more than their fair share. So then the last point on the sort of immediate demands is we need money for education, not for occupation. If we look at this war in Afghanistan alone, the government is talking about sending 30,000 more troops. It's always escalating this war. And does anybody know how much one soldier costs the government per year? More than $1 million. So, a lot more than they get paid. Yeah. So each soldier costs more than $1 million a year. We're escalating these wars, which are not good wars, like people want to say. The Iraq War has killed 1.5 million Iraqis. Whatever you want to say about how it's trying to help build infrastructure, it hasn't. It's destroyed it. That's what wars do. Afghanistan is no different. You get rid of the Taliban and you replace them with ex-Mujahideen, ex-CIA agent who's turned Afghanistan into prime opium cultivation land. That's a big step forward for the Afghan people, right? So we need to stop these wars, which means it means either the government has to totally realign its priorities, or we, the masses, the people, have to realign those priorities for them. And it's looking more and more like it's the second option. It's the one that's going to have to pan out. So ultimately, what I want to propose is that education can and should be free. These cuts, what they're doing, they're cutting programs that serve, that were won through struggles in the 60s, like ethnic studies, women's studies, programs like these. They're cutting programs to the people that need it most. At the same time, they're closing the doors to higher education on working class and oppressed people who need more access. So, this is the way it goes. The rich are going to balance their budget on us, and we're going to have to fight back to make sure that doesn't happen. Ultimately, we're going to have socialism. We're going to have to fight to totally change the priorities of the government for them. Build a new government that serves the interests of working and oppressed people. And only when we do that will we see an end to these trillion-dollar wars, to these huge economic crises and recession after recession after recession, and build a system that functions for the benefit of the people who need it. That's my talk. We can have some Q&A and discussion.
So with the Regent hikes, what I understood was that they were increasing fees for all public schools by 33%. So including elementary education. Is that the case?
Yeah,
right.
K through 12 also.
So like kids who are in 6th grade now have to pay way more for their textbooks, but they get around it by saying this isn't tuition for elementary school, this isn't tuition for public education, but basically they're charging them astronomical amounts of fees that amount to tuition. So poor kids can't afford to go to school, right?
Yeah, and it affects different communities differently. So it's the like in California and Los Angeles, it's schools like Garfield High School in East LA, where you have mostly Chicano students that are going to bear the brunt of this. Whereas
well, and what's happening with the community colleges? Because I know Santa Monica Community College, it was something so low, like maybe $50 a credit, or even maybe $25 a credit or something like that if you were a resident. But now you're saying that that is going to increase for those students, for the community colleges?
I'm not quite sure. I'm not an expert on what's going on with community colleges. My thinking is that Schwarzenegger's plan, the governor, wants to, basically, it's going to be an across-the-board K-12 community colleges and higher education. He's looking to make inroads towards privatization,
right?
As well as
so that only the rich kids can go to school, any school.
Fundamentally.
I mean, even on the elementary school level.
Or even if they're going to elementary school, they're going to have substandard education.
Right. Well, that's a given. But
more substandard education than before.
But then there's a chance, though, that it will just be the voucher system that they've been fighting for, and like you can, if you're poor, you get this voucher, and then everybody else sends their kids to the school that they can afford, right?
Right.
This might be somewhat unrelated, but on the same note of education, right? It's not specifically about access to, but given the certain reforms to the actual education of students in Texas, for instance, where they basically decided to rewrite history and teach them this history now, do you think it's a sort of related struggle to actually preserve what is taught as opposed to, not opposed to, but to actually say what, right, there's a notion that we should be fought for what we're taught, but as well as get access to being able to be taught in the first place. Do you think they're similar, or?
Yeah, SDS, Students for Democratic Society, that I organize with, has a campaign. One of its main campaigns is called Student Power for Accessible Education. And one of the core demands is not just accessible education, but free and emancipating education. Like, there's this thing to take, there was an idea of taking all of U.S. history prior to 1877 and not teaching it anymore. That was like, a ballot initiative at one point, and it didn't pass, thankfully. But there's an idea of not teaching people their history and not teaching people an education they need to really develop themselves and change things.